I am a grateful member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon, and my name is Sylvia Bost Tate. And that's not legal, but Bost is still a part of who I am. Absolutely. I don't really feel peaceful right now. I mean, I'm okay, but several people have said, "Are you nervous?" And yes, I do get nervous. I get nervous because the message that we are to carry is the message that I am to carry is how the program has worked in my life and helped me to begin recovery from the disease of alcoholism and use the tools that I learned in Al-Anon to deal with other situations that come up in my life. Because life just happens, and sometimes it sucks. And what the program has done for me is given me ways to be halfway sane in the middle of all the craziness. 47 is correct. 1974, which is before some of you were even here, born probably, but it's been a long time. It's been a journey of excitement. It's been a journey of great friendships. I remember the first Thanksgiving program conventions that I attended at the Holiday Inn down on the corner down there. Just, and I've seen people here today, and I had to say, I know who you are, but I can't think of your name because it's been so long since I've seen you. But in meetings like this, I feel at home because this is family. And just like the speaker said last night, I mean, he was amazing. His story was amazing, and it was spiritual, and it was about God's grace, and just set the tone for me for today. So my hope is that God's grace is extended to me this morning as I tell my story to you. Back several years ago, there was a speaker at the Jonesboro AA group from Blytheville. And he had, when he started sharing his story, he said the first time his sponsor told him to share his story, he didn't really want to do it. He was afraid. And the sponsor said, he gave him a page to read. Now, this is not conference-approved literature. This is from Hazelton, I believe. But it's a 24-hour-a-day book, AA book. And his sponsor gave him a page to read out of this book. And so he read the page, and as it turned out, he read the wrong page. But the page that he read, I want to share with you this morning. I mean, I not only have recovery in Al-Anon, I have recovery with AA people too. This is a good thing for me to read to you today. October the 2nd. What makes an effective talk at an AA meeting? It's not a fine speech with a fine choice of words and impressive delivery. Often a few simple words are more effective. They come from the heart. There's always a temptation to speak beyond your own experience and to make a grand impression. But it's from the heart that counts, because what comes from the heart reaches the heart. And when I heard that speaker last night, he spoke from the heart. Absolutely. So that was a good thing for me to hear. Okay, I'm supposed to tell you what I was like and what happened to me and what I'm like today. And it travels over, well, you can tell, a long period of time. So I have to go back in my memory, and I'll just tell you a little bit about my upbringing. I was raised in the 50s, and in the 50s, I thought the world was an oyster, and I was going to get the pearl, and everything was going to be fine and okay with me, because I thought that's what my family was like. And that day, my family was like that period of time. I didn't know that my dad had been a compulsive drinker. I didn't know that my mother had left my dad when he was, before I was even born. She had kicked him out, said, I'm not going to have any more of this, and she accepted him back when he promised not to drink anymore. Now, he didn't. He didn't. And so I know sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't work, but for my dad it did. So I was raised in a very secure family. I knew that my family loved me. We weren't rich, but we were not poor. My dad worked for the state. He was a forester, and he started out on a tower. He was a towerman. During World War II, he worked in Texarkana at the ammunition plant there, and we lived there during World War II. So you know I'm old if I remember World War II forevermore. I remember when it ended. I remember the nationalism and the seeing movies about soldiers and everyone standing and being very respectful of the flag. That's just what I grew up in. After the war, we moved down to South Arkansas, to the land of small pines and pink tomatoes, and that's Bradley County, Arkansas, Warren, Arkansas. So that's where I mainly grew up. I was in the 3rd grade there, and small town. Everybody knew everybody. Eventually, everybody knew everybody's business. And you know what was important to me? What was important to me was for you to know that I was okay and I would not disappoint you for anything in the world. I had to please people. Now, I don't really know where I got that. It was just in me to please people, so I grew up doing the right thing, you know. I joined the right clubs, I made good grades, I was in the National Honor Society, I was chairman of this and president of this, all that stuff I thought was who I was, but it was not. What I know today, because of this program, is that I had a really bad inferiority complex, and that I had to have your approval for me to be okay, because I didn't feel okay. So I went through high school, and in the 50s, I didn't want to have a career. What I wanted to have was a husband. And I wanted to have a husband and a family and raise a perfect family like I thought my family of origin was. So I said I went to a church school, where you go, but to a church school to find a preacher to marry to have a perfect family. It's funny today. It was not funny then, because what I found was an alcoholic. But so I went to this church school and I found Mr. Clean. He didn't cuss and he didn't drink and he didn't smoke. His mother ironed his jeans with a crease down the front. He was perfect. But you know, I screwed that up. I got so involved with this young man emotionally and pretty physically. But back then, see, I'm a good girl, so good girls don't do bad things. So there was a tension within me because I was afraid that I was going to really mess up and get sexual with him, and I didn't know how to handle that because you didn't talk about those kinds of things back then. Almost had a nervous breakdown. Went to the doctor, and he said, something's going on with you. If you don't straighten it out, you're really going to be in trouble. So I broke up with him. Didn't tell him why, because you don't talk about those kinds of things. You just don't talk about how you feel. Back then you didn't, how you feel. I broke up with him and immediately started looking for another man, of course. And I found Kenneth, my husband. I found my alcoholic. He was darling. He was shaped like an inverted triangle. He had broad shoulders and kind of narrow hips, and he could do the bop like you do not believe. We started dating, and I got him. And you know what? After I got him, I didn't know what to do with him. his mother and daddy were really pleased that that we got together, and they liked me, because I was good and I was perfect, and they thought that I could straighten him out because he was not following what they wanted him to do, of course. And me being who I was, I thought I could straighten him out. And I spent the first many years of our marriage trying to do that. Because that's what we do. Those of us who love alcoholics want to fix them. I'll bet you that alcoholics out here hearing my voice right now have had somebody trying to fix you at one time or other. No hands were raised. There you go. There you go. So I really tried hard to fix him. We got married. We moved down to Warren, Arkansas, where I had grown up, and had a child. Now, exactly 9.5 months after we got married, Kenny was born. You think they weren't counting the months in my hometown? Before that baby came, I was so glad he didn't come early. But so we had a perfect family. I was married, had a son, and Kenneth wasn't drinking. See, he had been drinking before, a lot. But I thought, well, he stopped. I fixed him. This is going to be okay. We started moving. Now, we moved from Warren to Little Rock. We moved from Little Rock to Fort Worth, Texas. I always could get a job when we moved because I was 2 years older than him. I always got a job. He would get a job. But he started drinking again, don't you know? Because I know today that he couldn't not drink. I didn't know that then. So I continued to try to keep our family normal. We both eventually had fairly good jobs, and we bought a house. And it was my perfect house. It was pink brick. It had rose-colored carpet. It had a two-car garage, fenced-in backyard. It was perfect. And it was on a street named Kennedale forevermore. So, it was perfect. But the drinking kept getting worse, as you know it does. He would stay out late at night, not come home at Christmas time, not come home to help me put the train together for our son. I remember one day kneeling in the kitchen, just on my knees and crying, just uncontrollably crying, because I didn't know what to do. I was trying so hard. And he didn't know what to do with me. He just turned around and walked off and left me in the floor crying. Another thing that happened was deer season, like about this time of the year, as a matter of fact. And one of his drinking buddies and him, they just always went hunting. And he came in from the hunting weekend and just drunker than Cooter Brown. Now, I don't know if you know who Cooter Brown is, but Cooter Brown could get pretty drunk, and he was drunker than Cooter Brown. So I decided I was going to teach him a lesson, and he went to the bathroom and knelt down in front of the porcelain throne and throwing up, of course, and I took a picture of him. I was going to show him just how ridiculous he looked. Well, back then you had to get the film developed, and all. I didn't have an instant camera to show him what he looked like. That picture disappeared. I don't know whatever happened to it. But that same night, I got him to bed, and he rolled off the bed, underneath the bed, on that rose-colored carpet. And I didn't want him throwing up on that rose-colored carpet. But I couldn't get him out. He was too heavy. So I called his drinking buddy down the street to come help me get him out from underneath the bed. I was so mad at him. But when his drinking buddy left, I put a pillow under his head, covered him up with a quilt. I didn't want him to catch cold. That's what we deal with. That's exactly what we deal with. So mad. We moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. Well, first we had another child, had Cindy, and then we moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, and had the third child, Bet. So I have my perfect family, but I don't have my perfect marriage. You know it gets worse. I mean, Bossier City was right across the river from Shreveport. I mean, that was just the place to go to drink. We moved again. I mean, we moved. We moved back to Fort Worth, and then we moved back to Little Rock. And where we moved in Little Rock was behind his mother and daddy's house in a trailer. Now, it's really hard to hide beer cans when you're behind your in-laws' house. And they knew what was going on in that trailer. And you know, I didn't want them to know because I'm perfect. And I'm doing a good job. And I didn't want them to know what was going on. That's just it. That's what happens. We moved to Jonesboro eventually, and I said, I'm not going to move anymore. We have 3 kids. I want roots. I want us to settle down and have a family, you know, like I knew that we could have if he, by darn, would just stop drinking and listen to me. Because I knew he was a good man. I knew that he was. Of course, that didn't happen. Didn't happen. He lost his job. He ended up loading freight at Jones Truck Line. And he came in one night and he said, I just can't get drunk and I can't sober up. I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, I had been working with a lady, a little gray-haired lady, a little sweet gray-haired lady. I had worked with her, and someone had told me that her husband was a drunk. And I called her because I thought, if she's living with what I'm living with, how can she be the way she is? Well, don't you know, she was in Al-Anon. Now, she had not said a thing to me about Al-Anon. Nothing about alcohol, alcoholism. I was attracted to her as a person. It's a program of attraction, not promotion. She took me to my first Al-Anon meeting, and it was in the old First Presbyterian Church off of North Main. We met in a little kindergarten. We had a little kindergarten table and little kindergarten chairs, and there, you know, it was wonderful. We walked through the big AA room, which was actually bigger than this, with tables along the side and smoke hanging down like this. You know, you almost had to bow to get under it. Big coffee urn sitting to the side. I loved it. I loved it. He would drive me to the meeting, sit outside in the Suburban with a Red Igloo cooler between the seats and his Schlitz beer in the cooler, wait on me to get out of the meeting because, see, he was really jealous and he didn't want me hooking up with somebody. Well, yeah, well, I wouldn't have done that anyway because I'm good, right? I'm not going to do that. Anyway, they would, after the meeting, the AA people would come out and say, there was a man that worked at the Recovery Center, Arkansas Recovery Center. No, it's not called the Recovery Center. It was the state, it was on the bypass, and I can't think of what it was called now. Anyway, we had a counselor who was in Al-Anon at that time, and he would leave the meeting and he would say, hey, Ken, we got a bed for you anytime you're ready. Of course, that pissed him off bad, really bad. But the time that he came to me and said, I just can't sober up, I don't know what I'm going to do, I called this man. And he called Hermie Plunk. And Hermie Plunk gave my husband medication to get him through the weekend so that he could go into the center on Monday. And he did that. His story, he has told me many, many times. He said he had been in there a couple of days, and of course they had AA stuff, speakers and things, and he said he just got down on his knees by the bed at one point in time and said, God, if you are there, I got to have some help. I can't do this by myself. No flash of lightning, no real warm, fuzzy feeling, just an admission that he couldn't do this himself. And then he didn't think about it for several days until he realized he had not wanted a drink. God did for him what he could not do for himself. My husband remained sober in AA for 20-something years. Now, I'm tagging along behind him with my Al-Anon stuff. I mean, we are in every meeting there is. We have people in our home. We were looked on as being Mr. and Miss Al-Anon, president and vice president of Al-Anon and AA. It was our way of life, y'all. It was what we had. And I learned so much from the alcoholics that were associated with my husband that were part of his recovery. It's a part of my DNA, almost. A part of my DNA. We even had a group of alcoholics and a group of Al-Anons that met together once a week, and all of us studied the big book. All of us studied Al-Anon literature. All of us studied the 12 steps. Because you know, the recovery from this family disease is the same. It is absolutely the same. The last step of the 12 steps, the only difference is we try to carry this message to others. Y'all try to carry this message to alcoholics. It's the only difference. So, in the meantime, our kids are growing up. Our son, some of you know, I call him Kenny. You know him as Ken, probably. And he's doing his thing. He's doing his thing. He was in Alateen, and we thought he was going to be okay, but he started getting in trouble at school. He started smoking pot, which at that time was unheard of. I mean, back then. It's not unheard of now, but it was then. He continued to have trouble. He started working for us. We had bought our own business. Kenny was a part of that business. And it got so bad that we had to ask him to leave the house. We kicked him out of the house. He lost his job. And all this meantime, I am doing my thing in Al-Anon. I'm involved in service structure. I'm handling offices. I stand for delegate of World Service Office. And in 1989, it was on a Sunday, we had a meeting, and I stood for delegate and was elected. I'm telling you that because my term would start in 1990. The very next day after I was elected, we got a telephone call from the police in Memphis. And the police said, "We have a John Doe in ICU. We think it may be your son." We flew to Memphis. It was not 4-lane at that time. It was, it wasn't 75 mile an hour. We got there and walked in and saw him, and y'all, he was twice his normal size. His face was swollen. It was awful. He had so many internal injuries. His jaw was broken. These bones up here were broken in his face. They didn't think he was going to live. He was in ICU for 21 days, which is a long time to be in ICU. I practically lived at that hospital. Kenneth was working. He came when he could. AA and Al-Anon supported us during all that. They supported us. They prayed with us and for us. And we just knew that we were going to be okay. They had a chaplain that had chapel services periodically at the Med at that time. And one of those chapel services assured me that I was going to be okay. Because it was a scripture. God works for good in all things for those who love him. And I knew that through this, if Kenny died, I knew I would be okay. I also knew if he lived, I would be okay because God would be with me. He did live. We brought him home to recuperate. They had cut the top of his head and pulled his face down and did surgery on his face. He looked awful. He looked awful. And so what did this mother think? Well, he'll do it. This is going to do it now. He has learned his lesson. He almost died, so we don't have to worry about him anymore. Wrong. He got to feeling better. He was going to meetings, attending meetings, and then gradually he started doing not only alcohol but drugs also. As a result of all that, he ended up in NA rather than being in AA. But whatever it takes. Now, when Kenny died in 2018, he had 20-something years clean and sober time. So, nothing, yes, thank you. Nothing could have helped me live through that, all that was going on there, if I had not had God with me, my higher power with me. The first 3 steps, I can't control it. I mean, you tell a mama who is perfect that she can't control her son. It's a hard pill to swallow, but I had already learned that trying to control my husband. Couldn't do that. I couldn't control it. God can, and I believe I'll let him. What I did, and this is just it's almost like a confession. Well, it is a confession. I took the first 3. I took the first 3 steps and a little bit of the 4th step early on, and I admitted 3 things that character defects. I just had 3. This was back way back yonder. I'm here to say. One of them was I felt superior. The other was that I was judgmental and critical of you if you didn't dress like me, act like me, talk like me. I was very judgmental and critical. The other was that I blamed his mother for his my husband's mother for his alcoholism. Well, she really was a bitch. She really was. I only say that because she and her husband are both dead now, so she was a hard person to live with. But she was not the cause of my husband's alcoholism. I know that. So I jumped from those 3 things that were wrong, and I'm smart, right? And I have a college education, and I can teach stuff, and I jumped down to carrying the message. I left out the middle part, the meat of this program. I just left it out. And y'all, I existed on that for a long time. I can teach things out of a book. I can share stories that I hear other people talking about. I can share how things have helped me now, but I did not have a spiritual experience to share. I had a faith, which I carried with me from my childhood, because I grew up in the church, but I did not have that personal relationship that tells me that God loves me just the way I am, with all my warts and all my calluses and all my defects. He loves me that way. And what that did for me, it freed me up to love myself. So I didn't have to try to pretend to be Miss Perfect. So I got off of that crap. Then what that did, it freed me up to love you just the way you are, with your warts and your calluses, because we all got them. But see, it started with that relationship with my higher power, which I found in this program. I believed that God existed. I didn't know that He played a part in my life. I didn't know that I could turn to Him and have that moment of quiet. I found it in these rooms, and not just from Al-Anon people. I mean from recovering alcoholics. Because see, way back yonder, I thought that I was the only one who was being treated the way I was being treated. And when I hear recovery stories, no, I'm not the only one. It's the alcoholism. It's not the alcoholic, it's the disease. So that was an eye-opener for me. I'm getting a little convoluted on time, but anyway, so we are all in recovery. We're living our life the best that we can. My husband develops lung cancer, and he dies in 1997, as I said earlier, with 20-something years in the program. So I'm widowed for about 8 years, living in Jonesboro, picking up odd jobs now and then, not knowing what I'm going to really do with my life. And I met a man. I wasn't looking for a man, just met a man who wined and dined me and took me to Memphis, to places I had never been before in Memphis. He had his sights set on marrying me. Well, I thought, why not? Might as well. I did not love that man, but I was lonely. So we got married, and he moved me to Hot Springs Village. Well, now, I don't know if you know anything about Hot Springs Village or not, but it is a total different atmosphere from what I lived in Jonesboro. A lot of social stuff going on. A lot of drinking going on, too. Happy hour and all this kind of good thing. But I married Paul, and I became Sylvia Tate. Married him in 2004. In 2016, he died. And here I am a widow again. But during those years of marriage to him, what I want you to know is that the steps and the tools that I used in Al-Anon to deal with the alcoholism in my family, I had to use in dealing with this man who was not alcoholic, but who had all the isms. And I started out trying to please him. I thought that was, you become who he wants you to be. Well, that doesn't work. So did that for about 3 years, and then I thought, well, I'll see if I can change him. See, I reverted back to my old habits because I was not closely involved with the program. I went to some meetings periodically, but I was not involved in what I feel in this room today. And so I reverted right back to what I had done before, either changing to please somebody else or trying to get somebody else to change to please me. And when I realized that that's what I was doing, I thought, well, crap. I'm going to be who I am. In the last 3 years of my marriage to Paul, I was who I was. See, I had gotten down on my knees to Paul like I had done with Kenneth, crying because I couldn't make things right. And just like Kenneth, Paul didn't know what to do with me. I mean, what do you do with a crying woman, Turn around, walk off, and leave her. That's exactly what he did. He didn't know what to do. So when I started taking a look at myself and realizing that I am a child of God, God loves me, God knows who I am, I don't have to live for or please anybody. The last 3 years of our marriage were good. They were good. I just had to experience that aloneness and that frustration and that fear all over again, not having anything to do with alcohol. There are some stories. I told somebody that I would share this story this morning and I almost forgot it. Kenneth and I both smoked. He died of lung cancer. I quit smoking, right? But I worked with him some in the office, and we didn't work well together because we didn't see things the same way. And it proved to be stressful for me. So I became a closet smoker. I mean, I'm good, right? I'm sponsoring a lot of people in the program. We've got a good life going. I could not stand for anybody to know that my halo had slipped off and I had started smoking again. So I would get a cigarette out of Kenneth's pack, either put it up my sleeve or in my bra, depending on what I had on, wrap it in toilet tissue first, right? Then I would go to the bathroom, light it, take a couple of drags off of it, knock the hot ash off in the commode, come back to my desk. 15, 20 minutes later, I'd go back to the bathroom again. I had to pee a lot. I'd like to say that I realized what I was doing, but the cigarette fell out of my sleeve one day at work, and I had to admit that I had started smoking again. Not perfect. I had started smoking again. So when that happened, I knew I had to go back to the first steps again, and I reworked my program. And I got a sponsor that I later said she was like a black widow spider. It was like she was consuming me. She was very active at area level. She was she was a good leader for a while, but she ran you down if you didn't do what she said to do. And I was afraid not to do what she said to do. But I ended up firing her because I said, I looked up Black Widow Spider, I want you to know. Didn't have Google then, but I looked in the dictionary, whatever, and it said that the Black Widow Spider will mate and then eat her mate after that happens. And y'all, that's what I felt like was happening to me. She was consuming me. Totally consuming me. And I fired her. Now, I didn't tell her why. This is like not telling that first boyfriend why we were breaking up because you don't know how to talk about it. Not telling Kenneth what was going on in my heart and in my head because you don't know how to talk about it. I didn't tell her why I was firing her. I just fired her, which was awful. Several years later, many, many years later, as a matter of fact, she came and spoke at the Jonesboro Thanksgiving convention. She was the Al-Anon speaker. And I asked to speak with her after she got through talking, and I made amends to her for that. You don't have to make amends right away. What's important for me is to know that there's something in there that needs to be amended, and I made amends to this woman. Now, what I also know today is that would not have happened. She wouldn't have had that control over me if I had not allowed it. I allowed that, and I wanted to be like her, and I wanted to do like she did, and so I allowed her to consume me. Didn't work. Did not work at all. So one more time, I had to get another sponsor. My current sponsor lives in it's just out of Fayetteville, up in the northwest part of the state. I don't see her very often, but she's a very solid, spiritual-based person with about the same number of years in Al-Anon as I have. And we can do long-distance sponsorship. I sponsor people today. But when I sponsor people today, we don't leave out the middle of the program. That's where the recovery is. And down those last three steps, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. See, when I was pretending early on, I had not had a spiritual awakening. I did experience that. And so I could carry it to other suffering Al-Anon people. When my second husband died, and I moved back here from Hot Springs Village, I just want to tick this off. 2016, he died. 2017, Kenny died. And my grandson died. 2018, I moved from the village here to Jonesboro, which I lost my family of faith there. 2019, my brother and his wife in Minnesota both died. 2020, my sister died. So I would be a lunatic today with all those losses if it were not for my belief that the God of my understanding is with me, helping me deal with what life throws out at me. And you know, I've got blessings out the wazoo. Out the wazoo. I've got a daughter who is a special needs adult. By the way, she lives in a facility in Senatobia, Mississippi. She's 58 years old. Have another daughter in Tennessee who has 3 children. I have 4 grandchildren. I've got 4 great-grandchildren. I've got some step-grandchildren. I mean, I am blessed, and I'm being here to be with them is one of the things that keeps me going. I live alone in my home that Kenneth and I bought when he sobered up and got a job. We live in Valley View. I moved back into that home, and I live alone. But I'm telling you, I'm not lonely. Living alone does not necessarily mean that you're lonely. It doesn't for me, anyway. There is a page that I want to share with you that, for me, was one of the most important pages in our One Day at a Time book. I know, before I get into that, the complexion of these two fellowships, the demographics have changed from back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Back then, it was all husbands and wives. Very few young people, very few. When Kenneth started going to AA, he was 37 years old. He was the youngest person in that room. And they told him he had not drank enough. You know, I've drank more than you, whatever. It's not the same today. So when I read this page, it's talking about the man I married, but it could be my son, it could be my daughter, it could be my mother, it could be whoever. This page says this: I learned in Al-Anon that the man I married cannot be the source of my happiness nor my sorrow. And see, he was the source of my happiness and my sorrow. The gift of life is mine, as his life belongs to him, to enjoy or destroy. So what turning loose and letting go and turning loose of control of means that I'm tending to myself. I'm not trying to tend to you. Now, you may be killing yourself. I can't do anything about that. I can't help. I can turn to God to help me deal with it, but I can't do anything about that. Then it says, just adjusting myself to things as they are, accepting what is today, adjusting myself to things as they are, and being able to love without trying to interfere with or control anyone else. See, I didn't know how to do that. If I loved you, then you had to be who I wanted you to be. You had to act like I wanted you to act. Do what I wanted you to do. This page says, You can love without being able to interfere with or control anyone else. It's just, that's the meat of my program. And every new person that I sponsor, I share that page with many times. And like I say, it doesn't have to be the man I married. It could be the son I raised, the mother that raised me, my neighbor across the street. It's anybody. So the disease of alcoholism is an insidious, cunning, baffling disease, not just for the drinker, but for those who love the drinkers and who try to help them straighten their lives out. Oh, Lord, I could talk forever, but I won't. I'm so pleased that you all are here. Thank you for being so attentive. And one more time this year, I'm on the committee for the Thanksgiving program. So thank you so much.